November 3rd, 2024. Outside the Emirates Stadium, Danny Morrison had kept his hands clean for 20 years. 20 years since the last time he'd thrown a punch that mattered. The Manchester City fan was drunk, loud, stupid enough to pick the wrong Arsenal supporter to mock. He didn't know he was staring at a former heavyweight who'd once shared the ring with Tyson himself. "Your daughter would be ashamed," the fan spat, not knowing Danny's girl had died at 16. That's when 20 years of buried rage cracked open like a dam. Security cameras caught everything that happened next, the three-punch combination that dropped a man twice Danny's size, the crowd's stunned silence, the moment a groundskeeper became a ghost from boxing's bloodiest era. What the cameras didn't catch was the twisted truth about to surface. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The City fan crumpled to the wet pavement like a marionette with severed strings. Danny's fist still burned with the familiar ache of bone meeting bone, muscle memory firing through synapses that hadn't been activated in 2 decades. Around him, the crowd pressed closer, phones raised like digital vultures documenting the moment his carefully constructed anonymity shattered. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered. "Did you see how fast he moved?" Danny stared down at his hands, weathered, scarred, but still carrying the devastating precision that had once earned him a title shot against the most feared man in boxing. The rain mixed with blood on his knuckles, washing away 20 years of careful restraint in pink rivulets. The unconscious man's face was already swelling, his breathing shallow but steady. Danny recognized the signs. He'd put enough men on canvas to know the difference between knockout and something worse. This one would wake up with a headache and a story nobody would believe. But Danny wouldn't be here when that happened. He pushed through the gathering crowd, ignoring the questions, the reaching hands trying to get his attention. His Arsenal scarf hung loose around his neck, the red wool now feeling like a noose. Someone grabbed his shoulder. "Mate, where'd you learn to—" Danny's glare cut the question short. The fan, barely 20, with soft features that had never seen real violence, stepped back like he'd touched a live wire. Good. Fear was honest. Fear kept people at distance. The Emirates Stadium loomed behind him, its modern glass facade reflecting the amber streetlights in fractured patterns. For 3 years, he'd walked these same streets, past these same supporters, invisible in his high-vis groundskeeper jacket. Just another working-class Arsenal fan heading home after tending the pitch where millionaires played with a ball. Now, everything was different. Danny pulled out his phone with trembling fingers, muscle memory from a simpler time when the only thing that mattered was the next fight, the next purse, the next medical bill. The contact list was pathetically short: work, emergency services, and one number he hadn't dialed in 5 years. Tommy Brennan answered on the second ring. "Danny? Christ, is that really you? I need a place to lay low." Danny ducked into an alley between 2 pubs, the noise from the stadium growing distant. Tonight. Maybe longer. What kind of trouble? The kind that gets uploaded to social media within minutes. The kind that makes headlines when someone with enough boxing knowledge recognizes a 3-punch combination that used to drop heavyweights. The kind that brings reporters digging through records that should have stayed buried. "The worst kind," Danny said. Tommy's pause stretched long enough that Danny wondered if the line had gone dead. They'd shared a training camp in '93, back when Danny was climbing the rankings and Tommy was sliding down them. Different trajectories, same brutal world. You know where to find me. Back entrance, like the old days. The line went dead. Danny pocketed the phone and started walking, muscle memory guiding him through London's maze of streets. He'd learned every route during his years underground, when staying in one place too long meant getting caught. Different kind of running now, but the fear tasted the same. Behind him, sirens wailed in the distance, either for the unconscious fan or for some other piece of London's nightly violence. In a city of 9 million, one knockout outside a football stadium barely registered. But Danny knew better than to trust his luck. Luck was what had put him in that underground ring 20 years ago. Luck was what had killed Marcus Webb with a single punch to the temple. And luck, it seemed, had just run out again. He caught his reflection in a shop window, still broad-shouldered despite his 58 years, still carrying himself like a man who'd learned to hurt people professionally. The groundskeeper's uniform couldn't hide what lay underneath. 20 years of hedge trimming and lawn maintenance hadn't erased the fighter. They'd just buried him under layers of mundane routine. But the boy who'd called out his daughter's name, that had cut through everything. Sarah's ghost still followed him, 16 forever, frozen in time before the cancer and the desperate choices that followed. The fan couldn't have known about her, couldn't have understood that those words would unlock something Danny had sworn to keep caged. 3 punches, 15 seconds, a lifetime of careful invisibility destroyed. Danny pulled his hood up against the rain and quickened his pace. Tomorrow, someone would analyze the security footage. Tomorrow, someone might recognize the technique, the stance, the devastating efficiency of a man who'd once stood toe-to-toe with legends. Tomorrow, the ghosts of his past would come hunting. But tonight, he still had time to disappear. The question was whether 20 years had been long enough to learn how to stay gone. Danny's key turned in the lock of his Bermondsey flat at midnight, the familiar click echoing through the narrow hallway like a gunshot. The sound had always comforted him. Home, safety, the end of another invisible day. Tonight it felt like a cell door closing. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, rain dripping from his jacket onto the worn carpet. The flat smelled of instant coffee and old newspapers, the scent of a man who'd learned to live small. 1 bedroom, a kitchen table that doubled as a desk, shelves lined with true crime paperbacks and old boxing magazines he couldn't bring himself to throw away. A life measured in careful routines and quiet corners. The envelope waited on his kitchen counter where he'd left it that morning, Sarah's name written across the front in his careful handwriting. 22 years old today. Would have been if the leukemia hadn't taken her at 16. Danny picked up the letter he wrote her every birthday, same ritual for 6 years now. Words he could never say aloud, apologies that would never reach her. Happy birthday, love. Daddy's still trying to make things right. He set the letter back down, his hands still aching from the confrontation. These same hands had held Sarah through her final night at Great Ormond Street, watching machines keep her alive while the cancer ate away everything beautiful about her. The medical bills had been manageable at first. His boxing purses covered the treatments, the experimental drugs, the desperate hope that money could buy miracles, until the tumor grew back. That's when Marcus Webb had found him at Mickey's gym, offering underground money for underground fights. No commissions, no drug tests, no questions. Just raw violence for desperate men with desperate needs. 20,000 pounds for one night's work. Enough to fly Sarah to that clinic in Switzerland where rich people bought extra time. Danny moved to the window, pulling back the thin curtain to check the street below. Empty, except for Mrs. Chen's cat picking through rubbish bins. Normal, for now. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. A ghost of the man who'd once graced magazine covers and talk show sofas. Iron Fist Morrison, they'd called him. Heavyweight contender with hands fast enough to drop anyone and a smile that sold pay-per-view fights. Before Sarah got sick, before desperation turned him into something else. The flat silence pressed against his ears. No television, no music, just the distant hum of London's sleepless traffic. He'd trained himself to appreciate quiet after Pentonville. 4 years of concrete walls and shouting voices that never stopped. Even now, sudden noises made his shoulders tense, made his hands curl into fists. His phone buzzed against the kitchen table. Text message from an unknown number, video going viral. That you outside Emirates? J. Danny's blood went cold. Only one person called him by that initial, and Jimmy Costello wasn't someone who reached out without reason. Prison had taught him which connections to maintain and which to sever. Jimmy fell into the gray area between. Useful enough to keep alive, dangerous enough to fear. He deleted the message and powered down the phone. Above him, Mrs. Kowalski's television murmured through thin walls, some late-night American film where problems got solved with clean violence and noble intentions. Danny envied the fiction. In real life, violence just created more violence, spreading outward like ripples in dark water. Sarah's photo watched him from the mantelpiece, 16 and smiling despite the 4-line taped to her arm. She'd been proud of him then, still believed her father was a hero instead of a killer. The last good thing he'd done was die before she could learn the truth about Marcus Webb, about the blood money that had paid for her final treatments. Danny's hands found the letter again. his daughter's name blurring under kitchen lamplight. He'd promised her he'd retire after winning enough for her treatment. Promised they'd travel together once she beat the cancer. See all the places she'd read about in her hospital books. Australia, where boxing was still pure sport. Maybe New Zealand, where nobody would know his face. Promises meant for a future that lasted exactly 18 hours after Marcus Webb hit the concrete floor of that Manchester warehouse. The building settled around him with small creaks and sighs, old bones adjusting to London's perpetual dampness. Tomorrow he'd have to decide, run again, start over somewhere new, or stand and face whatever came hunting. Tommy's offer was still good, probably. A place to disappear until the heat died down. But running meant leaving Sarah behind, abandoning the one place where her memory felt real, where he could pretend the letters reached her somehow. Danny folded the birthday note and slipped it into his jacket pocket, next to the key card that would get him into Emirates Stadium tomorrow morning. If there was a tomorrow, if 20 years of careful invisibility hadn't just been wasted on 3 punches and 15 seconds of muscle memory. Outside, London kept breathing, unaware that one of its ghosts had briefly returned to life. The question was how long he'd survive being visible again. Danny's phone rang at 6:17 in the morning, dragging him from the first real sleep he'd managed in 4 hours. The sound cut through his flat like a fire alarm, sharp and insistent. He'd powered the device down before collapsing onto his narrow bed, but muscle memory had made him plug it in to charge. Old habits from when missing calls meant missing fights, missing money, missing chances to keep Sarah alive. The number on the screen made his chest tighten. Emirates Stadium main office. Morrison. His voice came out rough, sandpaper against his throat. Danny, it's Margaret from HR. The administrative assistant's tone carried an edge he'd never heard before. Mr. Patterson needs to see you. Now. Don't come through the main entrance. Use the service gate on Ashburton Grove. The line went dead. Danny stared at the phone. Sarah's birthday letter still folded in his jacket pocket from the night before. 22 years old today. If cancer hadn't stolen her future. If desperation hadn't driven him to that Manchester warehouse where everything ended. He dressed quickly. Work boots, groundskeeper uniform, the high-vis jacket that had been his armor for 3 years. In the mirror, he looked like any other working-class man heading to an early shift, but his hands still carried yesterday's bruises, knuckles swollen from contact with bone and cartilage. Evidence of the moment his carefully maintained invisibility had shattered. The streets felt different in the gray pre-dawn light. Fewer witnesses, more shadows. Danny kept his head down, avoiding the CCTV cameras that watched every corner of North London like digital sentries. He'd memorized their positions during his first week at Emirates. Old prison paranoia that had served him well as a groundskeeper. Now, that paranoia might be all that kept him free. The service gate stood open, unusual for this hour. Margaret waited inside, clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield. She'd always been kind to him. Christmas cards, inquiries about his health, the gentle attention of a woman who recognized loneliness in others. Now she couldn't meet his eyes. Patterson's in his office, she said. Danny, whatever this is about, I'm sorry. The walk through Emirates corridors felt like a death march. Past the players' changing rooms, where millionaires prepared for glory, past the medical facilities that could have saved Sarah if he'd been born rich instead of working class. The irony wasn't lost on him. 3 years tending the pitch where men played a game for more money than most people saw in a lifetime. Patterson's office overlooked the stadium bowl, floor-to-ceiling windows displaying the perfect grass Danny had spent countless hours maintaining. The head of operations sat behind his mahogany desk, tablet computer open in front of him. On the screen, frozen in high definition, Danny's fist connected with the city fan's jaw. The timestamp read 22:47, yesterday evening. Sit down, Morrison. Danny remained standing. How long have you known? Patterson touched the tablet, and the video played. 3 punches, devastating precision, 20 years of careful anonymity destroyed in 15 seconds. The footage was crystal clear. Modern cameras didn't miss anything. Since about midnight, Patterson said, after someone posted this on social media with the caption, Arsenal fan knocks out City supporter. 20,000 views by morning. But that's not what concerns me. He swiped to another screen. Danny's employee file, complete with background check results from 3 years ago. Clean record, no criminal history, references from a landscaping company in Brighton that had never questioned his past. I had my security team run facial recognition on our knockout artist. Interesting results. Another swipe. Black and white photographs from boxing magazines, promotional shots from fights in the early 90s. Danny Iron Fist Morrison, heavyweight contender, before everything went wrong. The thing is, Patterson continued, Iron Fist Morrison supposedly died in a car crash in 1995. No body recovered, presumed dead. But here you are, very much alive, very much employed under a false identity. Danny's throat felt like sandpaper. What do you want? The truth. Starting with why a dead boxer has been cutting our grass for 3 years. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of London waking up. Danny could lie, could spin some story about coincidental resemblance and lucky punches. But the evidence was overwhelming, and Patterson wasn't the type to accept convenient fiction. My daughter was dying, Danny said finally. Cancer. I needed money for treatment. So you faked your death. So I killed a man in an underground fight and spent 4 years in prison. The words came out flat, emotionless. Manslaughter conviction under the name David Morrison. Close enough to my real identity that I could remember it. Different enough that background checks missed the connection. Patterson leaned back in his chair, studying Danny's face. And you've been hiding here ever since. Working here. Honest work, quiet work. Danny's hands clenched involuntarily. Until yesterday. Until yesterday, Patterson agreed. When someone with a phone captured footage of a supposedly dead boxer destroying a man outside our stadium. The tablet screen reflected the morning light streaming through the windows. Danny could see his past and present colliding in real time, 20 years of careful reconstruction crumbling like Sarah's letters in the rain. I need to know, Patterson said, exactly how much trouble you've brought to my doorstep. Danny's mouth felt dry as concrete dust. I don't know yet. Patterson's fingers drummed against the mahogany desk, a steady rhythm that reminded Danny of rain against his cell window at Pentonville. That's not good enough. Arsenal FC employs 800 people. We can't afford to become tabloid fodder because we hired a convicted killer under false pretenses. I've kept my head down for 3 years. Never caused trouble, never knocked out supporters outside our stadium. Patterson closed the tablet with a sharp click. The fan you hit is in Royal London Hospital. Concussion, broken jaw. His family's already talking about pressing charges. Danny's chest tightened. The boy's face flashed through his memory. Young, drunk, cruel mouth spitting words about Sarah. No different from 100 other City supporters looking to wind up Arsenal fans. He couldn't have known those particular words would unlock 20 years of buried rage. I can disappear, Danny said. Resign today. You never saw me. Too late for that. Patterson stood and moved to the window overlooking the Emirates pitch. The grass looked perfect from this height, emerald green under the gray morning sky. Danny's work, 3 years of careful attention to something beautiful and clean. The video's been shared 40,000 times since midnight. Football blogs are picking it up. Someone will recognize you eventually. Danny tried to swallow, failed. What are you saying? I'm saying you need to tell me everything about yesterday. Who you spoke to, where you went afterward, who might connect you to this club. Patterson turned back from the window, his expression unreadable. Because, in about 6 hours, this becomes a police matter whether we want it or not. The office fell silent except for the distant hum of London traffic. Danny could hear his own heartbeat, that same rhythm that had carried him through 12 rounds against Tommy Hearns in 1994. Before Sarah got sick, before Marcus Webb offered blood money for desperate fathers. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Text message. Patterson's eyes flicked to the sound. Popular man this morning? Danny pulled out the device, expecting another anonymous message about the video. Instead, the number belonged to Royal London Hospital. His blood turned to ice water. Mr. Morrison? This is Staff Nurse Williams. We have a patient asking for you. Says it's about your daughter, Sarah. The phone slipped from Danny's fingers, clattering onto Patterson's polished floor. Sarah had been dead for 6 years. Nobody at the hospital should know that name, shouldn't know the connection. Patterson picked up the device, read the message, his face hardening. Sarah was your daughter? She died. Cancer. 6 years ago. Danny's voice sounded hollow in his own ears. Nobody at that hospital should know about her. Unless someone's been digging. Patterson set the phone on his desk like evidence in a trial. Someone who knows exactly who you are and what buttons to push. Danny's mind raced through possibilities. Jimmy Costello had texted last night, proof that word was already spreading through the underground networks. But Jimmy dealt in favors and information, not hospital beds and mind games. This felt different, personal. I need to go, Danny said, reaching for his phone. Absolutely not. Patterson moved between Danny and the door. That message is bait. Someone wants you rattled, wants you making mistakes. They mentioned my daughter. They mentioned her name. Could be anyone who's done 5 minutes of research. But Patterson's voice carried doubt now, uncertainty creeping in around the edges. The internet never forgets, Morrison. Every newspaper article about your boxing career, every mention of family tragedy. It's all still there if you know how to look. Danny's hands clenched involuntarily, muscle memory from decades of training. 3 years of hedge trimming hadn't softened the calluses on his knuckles or the instincts that kept him alive in desperate situations. Someone was playing games with Sarah's memory, and that crossed lines Danny hadn't even known still existed. The fan you hit, Patterson said slowly. What exactly did he say to you? Called me a has-been. Said Sarah would be ashamed. The words tasted like poison. But he was drunk, angry about the match. Random cruelty. Maybe, or maybe someone fed him information. Patterson returned to his desk, opened a different application on his tablet. I'm looking at our security footage from yesterday. Multiple cameras, different angles. The screen filled with a bird's-eye view of the area outside the Emirates. Timestamp, 22:30. Danny watched himself emerge from the stadium, Arsenal's scarf around his neck, anonymous in the crowd. Then the City fan appeared, weaving through supporters with purposeful movement that didn't look entirely random. He's looking for someone, Patterson observed. Not just picking a fight with any Arsenal supporter. He's scanning faces. Danny leaned closer to the screen. Run it again. The footage played in slow motion. The City fan's eyes moved systematically through the crowd until they found Danny. Then his expression changed. Not just drunken aggression, but something harder. Recognition. Christ, Danny whispered. He knew who I was. Patterson's fingers froze over the tablet screen. You're sure? Look at his face. That's not random drunk aggression. Danny's voice carried 20 years of hard-earned paranoia. He was hunting. The security footage played again, and this time Patterson leaned closer. The City fan moved through the crowd with purpose, dismissing other Arsenal supporters until his gaze locked onto Danny. The moment of recognition was unmistakable, a predator finding its prey. Jesus Christ, Patterson muttered. Someone sent him. Danny's mind raced through the implications. The hospital message, the targeted confrontation, Sarah's name being weaponized by strangers. This wasn't coincidence. Someone had orchestrated yesterday's violence, used him like a trigger waiting to be pulled. I need those hospital records, Danny said. Patient information. Who requested me? You need to stay away from that hospital. Patterson minimized the video and opened another application. But I can make some calls. Arsenal has relationships with London hospitals, medical partnerships, player treatments. I can ask questions without raising flags. The office phone rang, shrill and demanding. Patterson glanced at the caller ID and frowned. That's the main switchboard. They're not supposed to route calls here before 8. He answered on the third ring. Patterson. Danny watched Patterson's face drain of color as he listened. The conversation was brief, monosyllabic responses that revealed nothing. When he hung up, his hands were shaking. The fan you hit, Patterson said slowly. His name is Marcus Webb. The air left Danny's lungs. Marcus Webb. The name he'd buried 20 years ago, the ghost that had haunted his every sleeping moment in Pentonville. But Marcus Webb was dead. Danny had killed him in that Manchester warehouse, watched the life leave his eyes as his skull cracked against concrete. That's impossible. Marcus Webb, age 22, student at Manchester University, currently unconscious at Royal London with severe head trauma. Patterson pulled up something on his tablet. According to his emergency contact information, his father died when he was 2 years old. Mother remarried, took her new husband's name. Danny's legs gave out. He collapsed into the chair across from Patterson's desk, 20 years of carefully maintained composure crumbling. His father was named Marcus Webb Sr. Patterson's voice was barely above a whisper. Died in 1994. No cause of death listed in the public records, just that he left behind a wife and infant son. The room spun around Danny like a centrifuge. The boy he'd hit, the cruel mouth, the vicious words about Sarah, was Marcus Webb's child. The son of the man Danny had killed for £20,000 and the desperate hope of keeping his daughter alive. He doesn't know, Danny said. Can't know. He was a baby when it happened. Maybe, or maybe someone's been filling in the blanks. Patterson set down the tablet and studied Danny's face. You need to tell me exactly what happened in 1994. All of it. Danny's throat felt like broken glass. Underground fight. Warehouse in Manchester. Webb was older, slower, but he was mean, liked to hurt people. The memories flooded back, the smell of sweat and cigarettes, the crowd baying for blood, Webb's sneer as he promised to end Danny's career. I needed the money, Sarah's treatments, the NHS wasn't enough, so you killed him. So he came at me dirty, tried to thumb my eye, and I defended myself. Danny's hands clenched involuntarily. Uppercut caught him perfect. He went down hard, hit the concrete. Brain hemorrhage. Patterson was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. And his son just happened to pick a fight with you outside our stadium? No. Danny's voice was hollow. Someone pointed him at me, fed him information about Sarah, about my past, used his father's death like a weapon. The tablet buzzed with an incoming message. Patterson glanced at it and went pale. Hospital update. Marcus Webb Jr. is awake, and he's asking for you by name, your real name. Danny stood up, muscle memory flooding his nervous system. Fight or flight responses honed by decades of violence and 4 years of prison survival. Someone had orchestrated this entire sequence, the confrontation, the hospital message, the revelation of identities, a chess game where Sarah's memory was being used as bait. There's more, Patterson said. According to the hospital, he keeps saying he knows why his father died. Says he has proof about what really happened that night. The words hit Danny like body blows. Proof meant evidence. Evidence meant witnesses. And witnesses meant the careful lie he'd maintained for 20 years. Manslaughter instead of murder, self-defense instead of blood sport, was about to collapse. Someone's been planning this, Danny whispered. Using that boy, using Sarah's name. They want me to come to the hospital. Then we don't give them what they want. But even as Patterson spoke, Danny knew it was too late. The web was already closing around him, 20 years of hidden guilt demanding payment. Sarah's memory was being desecrated by strangers who understood exactly which wounds still bled. And somewhere in that hospital, Marcus Webb's son was waiting with answers Danny was terrified to hear. Patterson's tablet chimed again. Another message from the hospital, this one longer. As he read it, his expression shifted from concern to something approaching horror. What is it? Danny asked, though part of him already knew the answer would destroy everything. Marcus Webb Jr. isn't just asking for you. Patterson's voice was barely above a whisper. He's asking for Danny Morrison. Says he has something that belongs to your daughter Sarah. Something she gave to his mother before she died. The words hit Danny like a physical blow. Sarah had been 8 when the cancer finally won, too young and too sick to give anything to anyone, especially not to the family of the man Danny had killed. But the specificity of the claim, the use of her name, the impossible connection, it felt like truth even as it made no logical sense. That's not possible. Sarah never met. Danny stopped mid-sentence as a memory surfaced, unbidden and terrible. The children's ward at Royal London Hospital, Sarah's final weeks, other families, other dying children, other desperate parents forming unlikely bonds in sterile waiting rooms. What is it? Patterson demanded. You remember something. Danny's mouth felt full of ash. There was a woman. At the hospital when Sarah was dying. She had a little boy, maybe 3 years old, brain tumor. She used to talk to Sarah when the chemo made her sick. And her name was Linda. She was kind, brought Sarah picture books, sat with her when I had to work. The memory was crystallizing now, sharp and painful. Sarah gave her one of her drawings, a crayon picture of a football stadium. Patterson leaned forward. Arsenal's stadium? Highbury, the old one. Sarah loved watching matches with me before she got too sick. Danny's hands were shaking now. I never asked the woman's last name, never thought about her boy after Sarah, after we lost her. Jesus Christ, Patterson breathed. Webb's mother remarried, changed her name to Linda Hartwell. But before that, she was Linda Webb. Danny felt the walls of Patterson's office closing in around him. Marcus's mother, the woman who comforted my dying daughter, was the widow of the man I'd killed. The tablet buzzed again. This time Patterson read the message aloud, his voice hollow with disbelief. He says Sarah's drawing is hanging in his bedroom. Says his mother told him it was a gift from an angel who went to heaven too soon. Says he's known for years that the angel's father was named Danny Morrison. Danny's vision blurred. 20 years of careful separation, of building walls between his past and present, and it had all been an illusion. Linda Webb had known his name, had known Sarah's name, had been carrying the truth about their connection for 2 decades. There's more, Patterson continued reading. He says his mother left him a letter before she died last year. Instructions to find you if anything ever happened to him. Says she wanted him to know the truth about his father, about the night he died. What truth? But even as Danny asked the question, he felt the answer forming in his gut like a tumor. Patterson's face was pale as paper. According to this, Linda Webb was at the warehouse that night. She saw the fight. The room tilted. Danny gripped the arms of his chair, fighting waves of nausea. Linda Webb, gentle Linda who had sung lullabies to his dying daughter, had watched him kill her husband, had seen the brutal violence, the blood sport, the moment when Danny's desperation turned him into something monstrous. That's impossible. There were no women at those fights. Never. Unless she followed her husband there. Patterson set down the tablet like it contained a bomb. Unless she suspected what he was doing, where the money was coming from. Danny's mind reeled through the implications. If Linda had been there, if she'd witnessed the killing, then she'd known exactly who Danny was when she befriended his daughter. Every kindness, every gentle word, every moment of comfort she'd offered Sarah had been built on the knowledge that Sarah's father was her husband's killer. Why didn't she say anything? Danny's voice cracked. Why comfort my daughter? Why keep the secret? Patterson scrolled through more of the hospital message. According to her son, she believed you were punishing yourself enough. Said watching your daughter die was justice enough for any sin. The cruelty of it hit Danny like a sledgehammer. Linda Webb had watched him suffer, had offered comfort to his dying child not out of kindness, but out of some twisted sense of cosmic justice. She'd turned his grief into her revenge, using Sarah's final days to balance the scales for her husband's death. She played me, Danny whispered. For 6 months, she watched me break apart and called it even. Danny! All those nights she sat with Sarah while I worked double shifts to pay for treatments. All those times she held my daughter's hand and told her everything would be all right. Danny's voice was rising. 20 years of suppressed guilt transforming into rage. She was savoring every moment of my pain. Patterson stood up, alarm replacing concern. You need to calm down. But Danny was beyond calm. The woman he'd remembered as an angel of mercy had been something else entirely, a spider spinning webs across decades, using his daughter's memory and her son's ignorance to orchestrate a revenge 20 years in the making. And now Marcus Webb Jr. was awake, armed with his mother's letter and hungry for his own kind of justice. Danny stood in the center of Patterson's office, his entire body vibrating with a rage that felt volcanic. 20 years of carefully managed guilt had just transformed into something far more dangerous, betrayal so profound it rewrote every memory he'd held sacred. She used my daughter's death as entertainment, Danny said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. Sat there watching Sarah fade away and called it justice. Patterson moved carefully around his desk, hands visible, like approaching a caged animal. Morrison, you need to think about what you're saying, what you're feeling right now. I'm feeling like Linda Webb turned my child's suffering into her own personal revenge fantasy. Danny's hands opened and closed reflexively, muscle memory from decades of violence asserting itself, and now her son wants to finish what she started. The tablet chimed again. Patterson glanced at it and his face went ashen. Jesus. He's discharged himself from hospital, against medical advice. The doctors say he could have serious brain trauma, but he's gone. Danny's blood turned to ice water. Where? They don't know. He left with a woman, mid-40s, said she was his aunt. But according to his emergency contacts, he doesn't have any living relatives except a stepfather in Manchester. The pieces clicked together in Danny's mind with terrible clarity. Someone else was involved. Someone who had been planning this convergence, orchestrating every move. The hospital messages, the targeted confrontation, the revelation of connections, none of it was random. He's coming here, Danny said with absolute certainty. To the stadium, where it all started. You don't know that. I know hunters. I've been one. Danny moved toward the window, scanning the street below with predatory focus. His mother spent 20 years poisoning him with stories about the man who killed his father. Now he's got brain trauma and a vendetta, and someone helping him make terrible decisions. Patterson's phone rang, the main switchboard again. He answered it with obvious reluctance. Patterson. A pause. What do you mean someone's asking for Morrison? Another pause, longer this time. No, absolutely not. Security should escort him from the premises immediately. Danny turned from the window. He's here. Downstairs. Claims he's Morrison's nephew. Says there's a family emergency. Patterson hung up and immediately called another extension. This is Patterson. I need security at my office immediately. Armed escort. But Danny was already moving toward the door. No police. No security. This ends with me. Morrison, stop. Patterson stepped into his path. You walk out there, and you become exactly what they want you to become. A killer. Again. The words hit their target, but instead of stopping Danny, they crystallized his resolve. I've been exactly what they wanted me to become for 20 years, a broken man carrying guilt that wasn't entirely mine to carry. Linda Webb orchestrated her own husband's death by letting him think he could break me. That's not how it works, and you know it. Is it? Danny's voice carried 20 years of buried rage. She watched me kill her husband and decided that watching my daughter die was fair payment. Then she spent 6 years pretending to be an angel of mercy while she savored every moment of my suffering. What kind of woman does that? Patterson's tablet buzzed again. This time he read it with growing alarm. The woman who helped him leave the hospital. The nurses remembered her name. She signed him out as his guardian. Margaret Costello. The name hit Danny like a physical blow. Jimmy's wife. You know her? Jimmy Costello, underground fight promoter from the old days. I called him last night. Danny's mind raced through connections. Maggie always hated me. Blamed me for getting Jimmy involved in the dangerous side of the business. So she's what? Helping this kid get revenge? She's finishing what Linda Webb started. Danny moved to Patterson's window, looking down at the street. A small crowd had gathered near the main entrance, not unusual for a match day, but his instincts were screaming danger. 20 years ago, Jimmy set up the fight where Marcus Webb died. If Maggie's involved now, it means she's been carrying guilt all this time too. Guilt or grudges? Both. Danny spotted him then. A young man in a Manchester City jacket, standing near the Arsenal statue, head wrapped in hospital bandages. Even from 6 stories up, the resemblance to his father was unmistakable. She wants to clear Jimmy's conscience by destroying me. Patterson joined him at the window. Christ, he looks like he should be in intensive care. Brain trauma makes people unpredictable, removes inhibitions. She's weaponized a damaged kid who thinks he's avenging his father's murder. Is he wrong? Danny turned to face Patterson, and for the first time in 20 years, allowed the truth to surface completely. His father was a piece of shit who beat fighters for fun and threatened to cripple me permanently if I didn't throw the fight. I didn't murder him. I survived him. Then tell him that. You think he'll listen? His mother spent 20 years building a mythology around his dead father. Now Maggie Costello's convinced him that destroying me will somehow honor that memory. Danny headed for the door again. This ends today, one way or another. But as he reached for the handle, Danny realized that 20 years of guilt had just transformed into something far more dangerous. A man with nothing left to lose and very specific skills for ending threats permanently. Patterson's hand closed over Danny's wrist as he reached for the door handle. Morrison, wait, look at me. Danny turned, and Patterson saw something in his eyes that made him step back instinctively. The same cold focus that had made Danny Morrison a legend in rings across Manchester and London. The groundskeeper was gone. What remained was pure predator. 20 years I've been carrying guilt that belonged to other people, Danny said, his voice carrying the deadly calm that had preceded every knockout of his career. Linda Webb, Jimmy Costello, even Marcus Webb Sr., who chose to step into that ring knowing exactly what he was. And now you're going to add his son to that list? Danny's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. His son is downstairs with brain trauma and a head full of lies, being manipulated by a woman who wants to use his pain to settle old scores. That makes him a weapon, not an enemy. Patterson released Danny's wrist but didn't step aside. Then disarm the weapon, don't destroy it. Through the window, they could see Marcus Webb Jr. pacing near the statue, his movements jerky and agitated. The hospital bandages were stark white against the gray afternoon, and even from 6 stories up, his instability was obvious. Nearby, a middle-aged woman in a black coat watched him with predatory patience, Maggie Costello orchestrating her endgame. She's been planning this for months, Danny realized, watching Maggie's positioning. Maybe years, waiting for the right moment to put that boy in front of me. Then why give her what she wants? But Danny was already moving past Patterson. His decision crystallized, because the alternative is letting them desecrate Sarah's memory forever. That drawing she gave to Linda Webb, they're using it as bait, making my daughter's kindness into a weapon. He pulled open the door, then paused. When he spoke again, his voice carried 20 years of accumulated pain. Patterson, if this goes wrong, if I become what they want me to become, you need to know that Sarah Morrison was the best thing I ever did. Everything else was just survival. Morrison. But Danny was already gone, moving down the corridor toward the lifts with the purposeful stride of a man walking toward his final fight. Patterson grabbed his phone, torn between calling security and following him down. Outside, storm clouds were gathering over North London, and the first drops of rain began to streak the windows. In the lobby, Danny ignored the curious stares of staff and visitors. The main entrance loomed ahead, and through its glass panels, he could see Marcus Webb Jr. more clearly now. The resemblance to his father was devastating. The same aggressive jawline, the same way of holding his shoulders. But where Marcus Sr. had carried the casual cruelty of a man who enjoyed inflicting pain, his son radiated the desperate energy of someone trying to make sense of a world that had never quite fit together. Danny pushed through the doors into the gray afternoon air. "Marcus," he called out, and the young man spun around so quickly he nearly lost his balance. "I'm Danny Morrison." For a moment, Marcus Webb Jr. just stared, his bandaged head tilted slightly, as if he was having trouble processing what he was seeing. When he spoke, his voice carried the slight slur of someone still recovering from serious head trauma. "You're smaller than I thought you'd be." The words were so unexpected, so mundane, that Danny almost smiled. "Your father said the same thing, right before he tried to blind me with his thumb." Marcus flinched as if he'd been slapped. "My father was a good man." "Your father was a violent criminal who specialized in breaking people for money," Danny said quietly. "But that doesn't mean you have to be." Behind Marcus, Maggie Costello stepped forward, her face twisted with 20 years of accumulated hatred. "Don't listen to him, boy. He murdered your father in cold blood. Left you an orphan for 30 pieces of silver." Danny looked at her with something approaching pity. Maggie, still carrying Jimmy's guilt after all these years. "Jimmy's dead," she spat. "Died last year, riddled with cancer and guilt over what happened in that warehouse. Kept saying he should have warned Webb, Should have told him what you were capable of. The revelation hit Danny like a body blow. Jimmy Costello, dead. The last link to his fighting past, gone without Danny ever knowing. And Maggie had been left alone with her husband's regrets, turning them into poison. So you decided to finish what Linda Webb started, Danny said. Use her son to get the revenge she never took. Marcus was looking between them, confusion and pain warring on his face. What are you talking about? My mother said. Your mother lied to you, Danny said, turning his full attention to the young man. About everything, including what really happened the night your father died. The rain was beginning to fall harder now, and Marcus Webb Jr. swayed slightly on his feet, the combination of brain trauma and emotional shock taking their toll. In his eyes, Danny could see the exact moment when 20 years of carefully constructed mythology began to crumble. And in that moment, Danny Morrison made the choice that would define the rest of his life. Marcus, Danny said, stepping closer despite Maggie's sharp intake of breath. Your mother knew who I was from the first day she met my daughter. She watched me suffer for 6 years and called it justice. Is that the kind of justice you want to carry forward? The young man's eyes flickered with uncertainty, his hand reaching up to touch his bandaged head. She said you destroyed our family. I destroyed a man who was trying to cripple me permanently for refusing to lose a fight. Danny's voice was steady now, purged of 20 years of false guilt. Your mother turned that into a story about heroes and villains because the truth was too complicated for a child to understand. You're lying. Am I? Danny pulled out his phone, fingers moving with surprising deftness for a man his age. Patterson sent me the hospital records from that night. Your father didn't die from the knockout, Marcus. He died from a brain hemorrhage caused by years of steroid abuse and untreated head trauma. The coroner's report was sealed to protect you, but it's all there. Marcus staggered backward, his face cycling through confusion, rage, and something that might have been relief. That's not, Mum said. Your mum said what she needed to say to make sense of losing her husband to violence. Danny's voice gentled. But grief isn't truth, son, and revenge isn't healing. Maggie Costello stepped between them, her face contorted with fury. 20 years Jimmy carried the guilt of setting up that fight. 20 years he woke up screaming about blood on the warehouse floor. You did that to him, Morrison. You did that to all of us. Jimmy set up Bloodsport for money, Danny replied, but there was no anger left in him, only exhaustion. I was just another product he sold to rich men who got off watching poor bastards destroy each other. Your husband's guilt was his own to carry. The rain was falling steadily now, turning the concrete dark and slick. Danny could see security guards moving through the lobby behind them, probably called by Patterson, but he held up a hand to stop them. This conversation needed to happen in the open air, under the gray London sky where lies couldn't take root in shadows. Marcus, he said, ignoring Maggie entirely now, your mother left you that drawing my daughter made. Sarah's picture. Do you know what she drew? The young man nodded slowly, his eyes unfocused. An angel, with my dad's face. She drew hope, Danny corrected. A little girl who was dying drew hope for a stranger's family because that's who she was. Your mother kept that drawing for 20 years, not as evidence of my guilt, but as proof that even in the worst circumstances, people can choose kindness over cruelty. Marcus was crying now, tears mixing with rain on his bruised face. I don't understand any of this anymore. You don't have to. Danny reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, not his current one from the stadium, but an old one, yellowed with age. This belonged to Dr. Helena Morrison, Sarah's pediatric oncologist, also my ex-wife. She runs a support group for families dealing with childhood cancer, has for 15 years. He held the card out to Marcus. Your mother attended those meetings for 3 years after Sarah died. Not because she was grieving my daughter, but because watching me fall apart had awakened her own guilt about lying to you. Helena can tell you about the conversations they had, about what your mother really believed regarding that night in the warehouse. Marcus took the card with shaking fingers. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm tired of carrying other people's guilt, Danny said simply. And because you deserve to know that your mother spent the last years of her life trying to figure out how to tell you the truth without destroying the father she'd created for you in stories." Maggie made a sound of disgust. "Pretty words, but they don't change what happened. Jimmy's dead, Webb's dead, and you're still standing." Danny turned to her with something approaching compassion. "Maggie, Jimmy died of cancer, not guilt. And if he was having nightmares about that warehouse, it wasn't because of what I did to Marcus Webb. It was because he spent 20 years setting up fights between desperate men and calling it entertainment." The security guards were closer now, waiting for a signal from Danny. But the violence everyone expected, the explosion of rage that had been building for 2 decades, never came. Instead, there was only a middle-aged man in groundskeeper's clothes, standing in the rain, finally ready to stop apologizing for surviving. "I'm going back to work," Danny said, addressing Marcus one last time. "If you want to honor your father's memory, find a way that doesn't require destroying yourself or anyone else. Sarah's drawing is hanging in your bedroom because your mother wanted you to remember that even people who've done terrible things can raise children capable of extraordinary kindness." He turned and walked back toward the stadium, leaving Marcus Webb Jr. and Maggie Costello standing in the rain with 20 years of carefully constructed hatred slowly dissolving around them. Behind him, Danny heard Marcus ask Maggie a question that made him smile for the first time in months. "Why didn't you ever tell me my mom went to grief counseling?"